Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Patrick Wolf, who is a highly acclaimed researcher from the University of Arkansas. And Dr. Wolf has written many books on school choice, and he is one of the most acclaimed and highly respected leaders in the school choice movement at a national level. And we are just honored to have you join us here today to share more wisdom with those who are involved in ACE, for those who perhaps are learning about ACE and school choice for the first time, and this incredibly important work that we're doing to make sure that all children have access to a great school. Dr. Wolf, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Wolf, in your 25 years of evaluating private school choice, what have you found to be the biggest misperception regarding these programs?
I think the biggest myth about school choice is that it doesn't help kids. Opponents claim that offering choice to parents so that they can match their child with a school that best fits their needs somehow harms children and undermines education. And when you look at the body of evidence that exists on it, the evidence is completely inconsistent with that claim. Now, let's start with test scores, because that's what they really push, is test scores as the single metric for evaluating the performance of the school choice program. There have been 18 evaluations of private school choice programs in the United States over the last 25 years. And the majority of them, a slim majority, but the majority of them find positive effects for kids. The rest of the studies find neutral effects, and there are a handful that find negative test score effects. And basically what skeptics do is they glom on to just those few negative findings in a few studies and basically try to argue that that delegitimizes school choice.
Can you share more? Because for 23 years, I've been in this work now, and you have been proving, as have other researchers, time and time again, that school choice is the most powerful way for a family to improve the education for their children. Why do you think it is that pundits are opposed to school choice as they are when there is overwhelming evidence?
Well, school choice threatens the education establishment. For much of our nation's history, public schooling has operated as a monopoly, certainly as a local monopoly in many localities. The district-run public schools had almost complete purchase of all of the K-12 students in the area. And basically the way a monopoly operates is it operates on predictability. And what school choice does is it adds a dynamism to the educational environment. And that's good in terms of innovation and diversity and distinctiveness of schools. But it's a threat to the people running the monopoly because it makes it more difficult for them to plan. That introduces uncertainty into their world and requires that they do things differently than they normally would.
There was a debate 2 nights ago for the Republican Party, and there was a question on education in America, and it was unanimous that we have a system that's simply not working for the majority of our children. And some people felt that we should dismantle the Department of Education, or that the teachers' unions are the greatest impediment to a quality education in America. How do you feel about these claims?
So what I'm really interested in is finding ways to improve outcomes for K-12 students and to encourage parents to play a stronger role in their child's education and in their child's lives. And school choice does both of those. The U.S. Department of Education, it does some things well in terms of supporting low-income schools through Title I and special education funding. But it also does some things poorly. I think that student loans, our federal government should not be dispersing loans. We aren't a banker. Our government's not a banker. And when they try to be a banker, they're a really bad one. And it's very hard for government officials to properly assess the creditworthiness of people applying for student loans for higher education. And as a result, basically, people have been encouraged, young people have been encouraged to take out more loans than they probably should and to pursue degrees that won't necessarily prepare them to repay those loans. And the government then is in a really tough position because the government doesn't like to disadvantage voters, potential voters. And that's exactly what they have to do if they demand repayment of student loans. And that's why President Biden has really pushed the envelope trying to legislate from the White House in terms of loan forgiveness. So in contrast, you contrast the things that the Department of Education does well, transfers to disadvantaged kids that are grants, and what they do poorly, which is loans and over-incentivizing people to attend higher education. I think the Department of Education needs to be reformed. I wouldn't vote to eliminate it.
Speaking of banking, our country is spending over $775 billion on an annual basis on public education. What is that getting us? What kind of results are we seeing for our children in our schools?
Well, Norton, if you like rankings, then the good news about America is that we rank very highly in one area of education, and that is spending per pupil. We are among the biggest spenders in the world. There basically are 3 countries that spend more than $17,000 a year per pupil on K-12 education. It's the United States, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Now, Luxembourg, every child is a prince in a royal family. So, you can sort of understand it with Luxembourg. And Switzerland has a lot of resources. But we are among the very top spenders in the world. And what that money gets us is national or international rankings of 38th in math achievement, 32nd in science achievement, 25th in reading achievement. So we are among the biggest spenders, and our investments in K-12 education yield very mediocre results for kids.
I know one of your good friends and someone that you've worked with in the past is Dr. Jay Green. And many years ago, Jay Green came out with a book, and it's called Education Myths. And one of his myths that he talked about was education and how much we spend per child. And a lot of people feel like the way you improve education is by spending more money. Can you talk a little bit more about how much money we're spending as a country, and is money really the answer?
Sure. So, we know from fundamental principles of economics and basically how markets and organizations operate that you get greater production and productivity when you invest resources in an efficient organization and an efficient production process. K-12 public education is not an efficient production process. And so the additional spending that we send to K-12 public schools yields very little in terms of increases in student outcomes. Even the most optimistic analysis that Caribou Jackson published a couple of years ago showed that if you increase spending by $1,000, you get about 7% of a standard deviation increase in student achievement. That's a tiny payoff for an extra $1,000. So one of the major benefits of choice is that it incentivizes K-12 public schools to operate more efficiently so that when they do get more resources, they will allocate them in ways that actually benefit kids. Those new resources will produce better outcomes. But absent that competition from choice mechanisms, you don't have any incentive for K-12 education to allocate dollars efficiently. And I think the best example of that we've seen is in terms of teacher salaries. Now, we know the teacher is the single most important element in the education production process. So you would think that district-run public schools would invest heavily in their quality teachers. But if you look at investments over time, teacher salaries have barely gone up at all. Administrative salaries and administrators in public schools have skyrocketed. They've more than doubled.
So the
in
money's
last
not
10
going where
years.
it needs to go, to the educators who could be educating our children.
Right. The money, the resources are going to people and operations that are distant from the child in the classroom. And that's a major reason why there's almost no payoff for higher spending in district-run public schools. And that needs to change. In places where we've seen vibrant competition, highly competitive education markets, we see better achievement, higher levels of achievement by public schools. We see more responsible allocations of funds by those public schools. That's market discipline.
Absolutely. Are you in favor of paying teachers more money to attract the best and brightest teachers and treating this like a free market system where if they perform, they make more money, perhaps they're bonused as well, and if they don't perform, they may not be equipped to be a teacher? Talk a little bit about your thoughts on the pay scale for a teacher.
Yeah, I am really excited about a lot of the education reforms in the state of Arkansas, my state of Arkansas. There was a package of reforms called the LEARNS Act that was spearheaded by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And a big part of that education reform package was universal school choice through education freedom accounts. But another really big part of that was junking the uniform salary structure, because uniformity breeds sameness and it breeds mediocrity. I mean, if you aren't going to be rewarded with a higher salary when you perform better, then that reduces the incentive. I mean, it's really straightforward and commonsensical. So under the LEARNS Act, districts can develop their own salary system and they can reward more effective teachers with higher salaries. And even on top of that, the state has a program where it's making $10,000 grants available to the teachers who deliver the most value added to students in public schools. So we now have a system where highly effective teachers can get paid more, and what that's going to do is it's going to lure more talented and gifted educators into public school classrooms, and it's going to make a huge difference for students.
You mentioned the LEARNS Act in Arkansas and the leadership of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and since she's been governor, passing this historic program along with the state legislature in Arkansas, an education savings account. For a lot of people, they may not know what an ESA is. Can you tell us more about this program and why that's going to benefit families in Arkansas and how this will improve their education?
Sure. So traditionally, private school choice programs have been structured as government-paid vouchers to parents or tax credit scholarships where donors get tax credits for contributions to nonprofit organizations that then package those monies as scholarships, as partial tuition or full tuition scholarships for low-income kids. That's what private school choice has looked like for many decades. But now, private school choice increasingly is taking on the design of education savings accounts. And what education savings accounts are, they're a lot like the flexible spending accounts that many families have for medical expenses, where you basically have a pot of money. It has to be spent on educational products and services, but the parent can decide specifically which services their child most needs and direct those resources towards those services. So it's a portion of the funding that the state would spend on that student in public schools. Instead, the parent pulls together a package of customized educational services to serve the needs of that child. In many cases, it's private school tuition. But it doesn't have to just be private school tuition. It can be therapies. It can be online courses. It can be textbooks. It can be science laboratory experiments that help support homeschooling. So it really liberates the parent to build a customized education around their child. And as Robert Enlow of Ed Choice likes to say, you know, with vouchers and scholarships, we get school choice, but with ESAs, we get educational choice. I mean, that's how expansive and flexible these programs are.
And that's a great example of the uniqueness of the United States of America. We've always been a country that's been bold and innovative. We try new things, and this is a prime example of a way that we can truly enhance educational opportunities for every family in states who are passing these historic programs. What kind of outcomes are you expecting from ESA programs? You're a researcher. You know what happens when you give a family a choice. So if you can, share a little bit about your thoughts on ESA programs and what you expect to see. And while you're talking about that, can you also address why it is that we've seen so many ESA programs passing in the last 2 years for the first time in our country?
So I expect that ESAs are going to continue the pattern of producing better, of private school choice programs producing better outcomes for kids. The outcomes, I think, will be strongest in areas like educational attainment, because we have a very strong research base demonstrating that school vouchers and scholarship programs keep children engaged in the educational project longer. So they're more likely to graduate from high school, they're more likely to enroll in college, they're more likely to obtain college degrees. We have a strong research base confirming that, and I think ESAs will accomplish and promote higher levels of educational attainment even more than vouchers and tax credit scholarships because of the customization. Because if you're a kid and you're getting exactly the kind of education that your parent knows you need, you're going to stay with that for longer, and it's going to more effectively prepare you for the discipline and the challenges of higher education. Or career training, vocational technical training as well. So I think ESAs hold great promise for producing higher levels of educational attainment. I think they'll also show other character effects on character outcomes. Corey DeAngelis and I did a series of studies on the effect of the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program on crime outcomes. And we were able to do that because Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, maintains a database with complete information about every police encounter that takes place in Wisconsin, every time someone's arrested, and the full resolution of that arrest. And it's publicly available, searchable. So if you're going to commit a crime, don't do it in Wisconsin. Everybody's going to know. So we were able to access that database and combine it with the information we had from the evaluation of the Milwaukee Choice Program that I did a while ago. And we found that students who participated in the Choice Program committed crimes at lower rates than their carefully matched public school peers. Particularly in the area of property crime, drug crime, and paternity disputes, which aren't necessarily a crime, but they're a legal, they're a legal process that reflects irresponsible behavior on the part of the individual. So school choice has this strong record of producing better character outcomes for kids. And I think the ESA wave is going to just enhance and further promote those outcomes. And so you asked, why ESAs now?
Why such an explosion in ESAs? In the last 2-3 years, legislatures and governors more than ever have been really passing these historic programs, and people are supporting it for the first time ever. And it's basically, you know, as we all know, it's extraordinary money that's now being offered. And you've been saying this for a long time. You've been beating the drum on the importance of school choice programs. And thank God we're seeing these programs passing now. But why now?
Well, I think one of the few silver linings of the COVID pandemic was it exposed parents to a lot more information about what was happening in their child's education. And many parents were surprised and disappointed at what they were seeing. They were disappointed in the lack of rigor in some of the lessons and some of the curricula that were being used in schools. They were disappointed in inappropriate content that was being communicated to students. There were some public school districts that basically were telling children, don't let your parents watch these lessons, which completely breaches the trust that is necessary between parents and schools, and really reveals that the teachers are conveying ideas that that they need to hide from parents, and they want to hide from the public. So parents saw that. They also witnessed the reluctance of many public school teachers, basically spearheaded by the teachers union, to reopen schools for face-to-face instruction.
Whereas private schools, for the most part, remained open, or if they weren't open, they reopened very quickly after COVID. Is that fair to say?
Right, yeah. So private schools fought to reopen as public schools fought to stay closed. so that's really a statement about how responsive private schools tend to be to parent and student needs. They wanted to be serving these students during this highly challenging and traumatic period in American history. And the teachers' unions demanded that public schools stay closed, and that this remote instruction, which was really poorly designed and delivered, continue until schools are supposedly completely safe. Well, completely safe is an unachievable goal, so it just kept pushing the reopening further and further away.
And by the way, excuse me for interrupting here, do you liken that to a small business, where a small business, they will stay in business if they continue providing a great service to their customers and their clientele? And that's what a private school is doing. You have customers who are paying money for their students' tuition, and if their kids aren't going to school, if they're not in business and they're not educating their children, then that client's not happy with the service that's being rendered. Is that the reason why private schools also remained open and found a way to reopen quickly? Conversely, a public school, whether they perform or not, they have the money they need.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's in the public school world. It's full of guarantees. The private school world, you have to deliver to keep your customers. But what COVID did is it really shook up, I think, the public school establishment, because they actually saw about 1.5 million public school kids leave the system. Many of them going to homeschooling. The proportion of students homeschooled, and we're not counting remote instruction, we're counting real, true homeschooling.
Just to clarify what you're saying, the majority of families who left public schools during COVID, the majority homeschooled.
Not necessarily the majority, but a big portion of that 1.5 million went into homeschooling. Another portion went into private schools that were open. So the charter school enrollments increased, but in some states, as long as district-run schools were locked down, public charter schools had to be locked down the same. And of course, the charter schools were clamoring to reopen. They wanted to reopen and serve students, but as public schools, they had to obey the orders of the state Department of Education. So they weren't able to reopen as quickly as they did, but still, their enrollments increased and their wait lists increased pretty dramatically too. And sadly, some of that 1.5 million in kids who left the public school district just dropped out and disappeared.
That's sad.
Yeah. And so we've lost those children. Yes, we've lost those children.
Can you talk about the consequences when a child drops out of school? What does that mean for the taxpayer? What does that mean for our country as a whole when a person is no longer being educated and not graduating from high school?
A high school diploma is a crucial milestone for a young person and is highly predictive of many life outcomes, positive life outcomes. So conversely, high school dropouts dropping out of high school is highly predictive of a lot of negative outcomes. High school dropouts are much more likely to develop a criminal record. They're much more likely to be on public assistance. They tend to earn, their lifetime earnings are about $1 million less than someone who gets a high school diploma. Their lifespan is shorter. They don't live as long. You don't live as long if you drop out of high school. Your likelihood of getting married is much lower because, I mean, in many cases, you're not viewed as marriageable. You're not impressive as a future spouse and partner if you didn't at least stay in school long enough to get your high school diploma. So dropping out of high school is a huge anchor around the neck of young people that stands in the way of their success. And the fact that the pandemic and the response of some decision makers to the pandemic led to these high dropout rates and chronic truancy rates also. Tom Dee of Stanford University just yesterday released a study on how chronic truancy rates are way up. Even after the public schools reopened, kids did not consistently return to class. And the consequences are just going to be dire for our country in terms of citizenship behavior, in terms of economic productivity. We're going to have a lost generation in many respects.
Do you have any data that shows what happens to a student if they go to a private school and they graduate in 8th grade and they go to a public school in high school and they've laid a foundation? Their education's been laid in the formative years in grades K through 8, which I've heard are the most important years for any kid to be educated. And after 8th grade, if you go into a public school, you're likely going to graduate from high school, but if you're not prepared beforehand, that's not the case. Is that true?
Yeah, there's a substantial amount of evidence that if you have to pick a portion of a child's education where they have access to a quality private school, K-8 is somewhat more important than high school because it does lay that foundation. And for example, in our Milwaukee parental choice program evaluation, we had 2 cohorts. We had an elementary school cohort and a high school cohort. And the elementary school cohort, a significant proportion of them did not continue in private school into high school. But still, we were able to track them all the way into college. And they graduated from college at a rate that was 27% higher than the rate of college graduation of their matched students, even though they didn't all have access to private schooling in high school. They had it in elementary school, and that laid the foundation for them to continue through and be successful. So the elementary grades are very important for promoting education outcomes. So that would be test scores and attainment. Access to private schooling in high school has a stronger effect on character outcomes. So grit, persistence, a civic-mindedness, and crime avoidance. Those are the kinds of character outcomes that are shaped more strongly in private high schools.
Why is that?
Well, because when kids are in high school, you know, they are becoming adults. You know, they've gone through puberty, or they're going through puberty. They're changing from children to adults, and a lot of their considerations are and formation is more social than academic. Now, obviously, they still have to learn stuff in high school, and you need to have a strong curriculum in a private high school. But the social environment of the school is very important to children's development at the high school level as well. And that's really where they start to develop habits of mind, but also habits of morality and habits of behavior that will shape them going forward. Now, those habits start being formed in elementary school, but high school can be a very sort of volatile and dynamic time, and it can really be a pivot point in terms of behavioral outcomes and character outcomes for kids. So even if a child can't get access to a private education in K through 8, if they have that opportunity in high school, it can still set them on a path for success.
Prior to our interview, you mentioned that you started a Catholic school in Arkansas, Ozark Catholic Academy, and you just mentioned the importance of the character and perhaps even the faith formation as well and what they can do for a child. Is that part of the reason why you launched this school, because you saw a correlation between the character and the faith in a child? And also, I believe that there was research during COVID that showed that when students were floundering in public schools, the Catholic school students and perhaps even private school students as a whole, they were flourishing during COVID. They weren't declining at the same rate that public school students were. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of having a character and faith-based opportunity for a family that desires that?
Sure. And yes, in terms of NAEP scores after COVID, Catholic schools experienced no COVID learning loss. They were able to sustain the same level of learning post-COVID as their students had pre-COVID, whereas other types of schools suffered these terrible drops.
And is that because they returned to school faster, or is that because they adjusted on the fly even with their online programs?
It was both. It was both. They did get back to in-person learning sooner, but they also were more effective in delivering the remote instruction when they had to, because for a period of time, states ordered all schools closed, even private schools. So they didn't really have a choice. And if their only choice was remote instruction, they just tried to deliver it as effectively and conscientiously as they could. But what we're excited about at Ozark Catholic Academy is just the idea of building a positive school culture. And it's a culture that's strongly infused with moral values of conscientiousness and respect for yourself and other people. It's built on the idea that learning is joyful. So we try to promote a joyfulness to the learning. It's not rote instruction. It's very interactive and seminar based. We use a classical curricula, so we use great books and classic moments in history. Classic novels are all a major part of our instructional program. We have houses like in Harry Potter, and we even have a sorting hat to decide which house the freshmen are assigned to.
That's very creative.
And we have head boy and head girl, and we have competitions throughout the year for the house cup. And I'm in the House of the Oak. As a board member, the board members are assigned to houses as well.
Is Slytherin one of the categories?
No, I'm afraid not. Not Slytherin. There's the House of the Mountain, the House of the Oak, the House of Water, and the House of the Elk. Those are the 4 houses.
I love it. You're creating not just a joyful environment, but a fun environment, an environment where I'm guessing kids, they want to go to school on a daily basis.
They do, and there are so many activities that they can be involved in, and what that means, Norton, for a high school of 110 kids, when you have a lot of extracurriculars and a lot of student organizations, there are tremendous opportunities for leadership. So a very high proportion of the students graduate from our high school with significant leadership experiences, and then take that forward into college, military, or career. And those are the 3 pathways that students take out of Ozark Catholic Academy, with the overwhelming majority of them going to a 4-year college and university.
Out of curiosity, have you done any research on students who graduate from college? Are they returning to their communities and serving them? Are they giving more money philanthropically? Are they involved in churches? Are they involved in education? Are they marrying? What is your research showing for families that or students who are graduating from college?
Wow, that's an excellent question. There isn't much research on that. I did a study with my colleague Albert Chang and Brad Wilcox and Wendy Wang of the Institute for Family Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. And what we did was we got our hands on a couple of national surveys of adults that asked about their education and also asked about their marriage history and childbearing history. And we were even able to use the data to determine whether they ever had a child out of wedlock. So whether their children were born before or after they got married, outside of marriage or inside marriage. But we also knew what kinds of schools they went to as young people. What we found, and we originally labeled our report the Protestant family ethic, because what we found was that Protestant schools, evangelical Protestant schools, produce very high rates of positive marriage outcomes. And the marriage outcomes we looked at were ever married, never divorced. So you married and that marriage is your sole marriage. Ever married, never divorced. Ever divorced as a negative marriage outcome, and then ever had a child out of wedlock. And the students who attend Protestant school, controlling for other background factors, they had much higher rates of marriage, they had much lower rates of divorce, they had much lower rates of bearing children out of wedlock. Now, Catholic schools also had much lower rates of bearing children out of wedlock, but they didn't differ significantly from public school students in terms of rates of being married and rates of getting divorced, except in the subgroup of low-income kids. That's where access to a Catholic school made a huge difference in terms of their marriage outcomes, much more positive marriage outcomes for low-income kids, kids who grew up low income and had access to a Catholic school.
Wow, that's incredible. We have a third-party researcher that looks at data for ACE scholarship students, and there's been some fascinating research, not just on their academic performance and that they're graduating from high school. We see our students are going to college and they're doing fantastic as well. But there's some very interesting research showing that when they go to a private school, parents are reading to their children more, they're eating dinner together as a family, they're playing games, there's less technology in the homes, they're more focused, and they're also engaged civically as well within their communities by volunteering more. Why is a private education, or perhaps why is school choice as a whole, why is it changing the family unit and dynamic?
Well, Norton, I think it all gets back to a brilliant Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville. And when de Tocqueville traveled around America in the 1820s and early 1830s and wrote his seminal book, Democracy in America, one of the things that really struck him was the idea of the grassroots voluntaristic organization, that Americans like to band together voluntarily in their communities and make a positive difference. And I see private schools and school choice as facilitating and promoting that Tocquevillian vision of organic, voluntary association that people are very comfortable doing and that has a strong effect on them and builds these bonds of social capital within communities that connects, it's like the connective tissue that connects individuals to their communities, and I know we aspire for district-run public schools to produce that connective tissue, but I think, and I don't just think it, I mean there's strong research to support it, that in terms of civic outcomes like tolerance and political involvement and voluntarism and dedication to your community, people who have experienced private schooling tend to have higher rates of all those positive civic outcomes that demonstrate that connection and responsibility to their community. And I think it harkens back to the observations of Tocqueville about these vibrant voluntaristic organizations.
Speaking of the Tocqueville, you must feel incredibly great about your career and what you're doing for the school choice movement, because your research is bearing witness to the fact that when you give a family choice, that their outcomes are being positively changed. Dr. Wolf, you must be incredibly gratified by the work you've been doing, because you are a nationally acclaimed researcher in school choice, and we quote you all the time, as do a lot of other people, for your research showing that school choice is not just a concept and a theory, it really works. You must love your work and the fact that you've made a difference in the United States.
Well, I do love my work, Norton. I didn't anticipate it would end up in this place necessarily. My graduate training, my doctorate, is in political science and public administration. And I initially studied government organizations and their effectiveness. But I always was a quant head. And I quickly learned that public schools were the most ubiquitous government organization in the country. So if I wanted to study large numbers of organizations, of government organizations, and learn about what makes them effective or ineffective, I needed to study schools. So I started studying schools in the late 1990s, and that's when the school choice movement was taking hold. And the big question was the governance of schools. Should it be private? Should it be public? Should it be a hybrid of the two through charter schools? And so I got involved in evaluating school choice programs as part of my effort to learn what makes schools effective and good at delivering positive outcomes for children and families. And I just kept seeing these positive results from these school choice programs I evaluated. Initially with Paul Peterson of Harvard University, when we looked at the privately funded choice programs, much like the ACE Scholarship Program in New York City, Dayton, and Washington, D.C. And then later, when I did the study for the U.S. Congress of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, and then Milwaukee, and eventually Louisiana, and I even helped study a private school choice program in Delhi, India. So, so I've studied choice around the world, and we just keep seeing positive effects. It was great when we got the results from the India study, because the achievement effects were so strong for girls. And India has a history of being a patrimonial society where the education of girls is a much lower priority than the education of boys. And what we found is that when parents have access to private schools through choice, they're more likely to push their daughters to learn more and go farther in school. When they don't have those choices, they just focus on their sons.
Interesting. I've never heard that before. Tell us a book or two that every person listening today should pick up to learn more about the choice movement and the impacts that you've seen.
Yeah, so there are some great books out there, and certainly they haven't all been written by me. That's for sure.
But some of the best ones have. So make sure that we know the books we should pick up that you've written too.
So the books that I'm most proud of are The School Choice Journey, which I co-authored with Thomas Stewart. In that book, we tracked 100 families who were experiencing school choice for the first time in the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. And we ran a series of focus groups and interviews about how they experienced school choice and how it transformed them from government clients to informed consumers and ultimately to active citizens who demonstrated in defense of the program when a Democratic Congress tried to take it away. So it was the very clients of the program who became customers through school choice that were activated to use their citizenship rights to defend school choice for their families. So the School Choice Journey, I think, is a fun book. And then 3 years ago, I edited a book called School Choice: Separating Fact from Fiction. And there, I collected summary essays, reviews of the literature, the research literature that about a dozen authors wrote about various aspects of school choice, how parents choose, what they're looking for in a school, the integration effects of school choice, which are consistently positive, the civic effects of school choice. So that's a good book, a good reference book for background information on choice. And then a great book written recently, not by me, but I do have a chapter in it, and that is School Choice Myths by Corey DeAngelis and Neil McCluskey. So
Excellent book, I agree.
yeah, it's a great book, wonderful collection of authors. In a way, it's sort of a sequel to Jay Green's Education Myths, but it focuses very specifically on school choice and really knocks down all of the false claims that opponents tend to make against choice.
Which, by the way, speaking of Dr. Green's book, it feels like a classic at this point because it was so many years ago that he released the book, but some things never change. His evidence and research back then, 20 plus years ago when he wrote the book, is really the same today. Things are not changing. We're showing that school choice is a very powerful outcome for students. In conclusion, why are you optimistic about education in America?
K-12 education is going to be delivered in a much more dynamic and competitive market than ever before. I mean, before the pandemic, 82% of K-12 students attended district-run public schools. District-run public schools will never have that large of a market share again. A lot of students have left and they're not coming back because there are so many exciting options available. There are micro schools, hybrid homeschools, a lot of different private schooling models. Classical education is really having a tremendous rebirth in our country. And homeschooling is so much easier and so much more resource rich now than it used to be, that's an exciting option for a lot of families. So I just see a much more dynamic K-12 education system. And sure, we took a horrible gut punch with the COVID pandemic, but I think the system now is better equipped to deliver quality education for kids. And the children who suffered through the pandemic may not regain all the learning that they lost, but I think they'll regain some, and the system is better positioned to deliver strong outcomes for kids going forward, including the public school system, which is going to face a lot more competition and knows that they have to step up their game and deliver results for families.
You are right. COVID was a sucker punch, and it was awful what happened during COVID. So many kids were being left behind. Now that the dust has settled, we know that still is the case. However, you're right. We've adjusted and we've learned a whole lot from there. And because of that, we now have these prolific programs in school choice that are flourishing. And that means that millions of students will now have access. So I guess when you look at this, that is the optimistic side of what happened during COVID. But sadly, so many kids were left behind. And that's why we do the work at ACE that we do, is to help those families and ensure that they have access to great schools. If you were talking to someone and they ask you a question why they should support ACE scholarships, what would you say?
It makes a huge difference for kids. And it's just undeniable that parents are the world's foremost experts on the needs of their children. When they have resources through scholarship programs or through government-supported programs to select a private school for their child, they have more options to land their child in an educational environment that's the best fit for their needs. And so ACE Scholarship plays a major role in facilitating that access to private schooling as an option for families. In many cases, that's where their child needs to be.
Well said. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us and talk about this issue that we love so much. And for all those who are listening that are involved in ACE scholarships, thank you very much. You are making an extraordinary difference. And this is a very simple concept, but it's a profound impact. We are making a huge difference in the lives of our kids. Dr. Wolf, thank you for the work you're doing, for being a leader in school choice in our country. Thank you so much.